Greetings. My name is Bill Fletcher, and welcome on behalf of the Campaign to End the Moroccan Occupation of the Western Sahara, the Institute for the Black World 21st Century, and the Pan-African Unity Dialogue. Welcome to our third web discussion on the Western Sahara. And the Western Sahara, to remind you, is located in Northwest Africa. There is a conflict that has been undergone since the 1970s, when there was an anti-colonial struggle against the Spanish, who had colonized the Western Sahara since the 1800s. That was followed by a movement of resistance and for national liberation against the Moroccans, who invaded the country in 1975 and have secured control of about 2/3 of the Western Sahara. Between 1991 and 2020, there was a truce, during which time there was supposed to be negotiations towards a final settlement and the recognition of national self-determination. As we have discussed in prior web discussions, that effort was undermined by the Moroccans. But not just the Moroccans, and that's what we're going to be talking about tonight. We're going to be looking at the role of the United States, which has not been a disinterested party, as they would say, in this conflict. In order to help us look and explore the role of the US and US policy towards the Western Sahara, we're joined by Katlyn Thomas, an attorney, a former MINURS O official, MINURS O being the UN organization that was to deal with the Western Sahara. She's the author of The Emperor's Clothes, The Naked Truth About Western Sahara. Also joining us is Stephen Zunes, professor of politics and international studies at the University of San Francisco, and the co-author with Jacob Mundy of Western Sahara, War, Nationalism and Conflict Resolution. We will later be joined, I believe, well, Ambassador Ross is here, so excellent. Finally, we have Ambassador Christopher Ross, who was ambassador of the United States to Algeria from 1988 to 1991, and then ambassador to Syria from 1991 to 1998. He then became the personal envoy of the United Nations Secretary General for the Western Sahara from 2009 to 2017. And I want to welcome you, the observers and viewers of this program, and welcome our guests. Thank you very much for joining us. So I want to actually start with a question to you, Katlyn, and the question is pretty straightforward. And for the viewers, just let me say, I'm going to start with questions to the panelists, and then we're going to just have a discussion, like a living room discussion. Katlyn, you have said on more than one occasion that the United States has been, if not responsible, co-responsible for this conflict. What exactly do you mean by that when you make that allegation?
All right. I believe that this entire conflict may not have occurred had it not been for the meddling of the United States government in 1975. You have to remember, in 1974, this colony was a colony of Spain. And in that year, Spain decided that it would allow the inhabitants of the colony, the Sahrawi, to have a referendum to determine their future. But before this referendum could take place, Morocco and Mauritania asked that Spain withhold the referendum for a while to allow them to prosecute the claims that they had to the territory at the International Court of Justice, which they did. And in 1975, the ICJ came out with a decision rejecting their claims. Nevertheless, King Hassan of Morocco then organized a group of civilians, 350,000 civilians, which he threatened he would send into the territory to claim it for Morocco, unless Spain agreed to withdraw and let Morocco take it over. At that point, Henry Kissinger, according to records we received from Freedom of Information Act requests, Henry Kissinger basically arm twisted Spain to capitulate to Morocco. and to allow Morocco to take over the territory. Now, Henry Kissinger at this time was not above using underhanded means to get what he wanted. And when the international community insisted on having a referendum, he took means to make sure that the referendum would cater to Morocco. His deputy Atherton suggested that the US, and I'm quoting here now, do all it can do to see that the UN self-determination procedure comes out in favor of Morocco, unquote. And that message has been carried back to Hassan. And then Arthur Hartman, the head of European Affairs, noted that the Spanish government was very explicit, those were his terms, about what they would do in influencing the referendum for Morocco. On the morning of November 3rd, 1975, Kissinger suggested that the US let the UN handle the question of Western Sahara, quote, like West Irian, where they fuzz the consulting the wishes of the people and get out of it. And on November 11th, he again suggested that the US, quote, just turn it over to the UN with a guarantee it will go to Morocco. And again, one day later, he added, quote, the hope is for a rigged UN vote. Now, if the UN appeared ineffective during this period to stop Morocco's aggression, it is partially due to the United States' efforts. Daniel P. Moynihan, the US ambassador to the UN during this period, wrote in his memoirs that the Department of State desired that the UN prove utterly ineffective in whatever measures it undertook. This task was given to me, and I carried it forward with not inconsiderable success. So these are just a few of the documents that we've been able to get from our Freedom of Information request that shows the extent to which the US government put its hand on the balance of this situation in Morocco's favor. And throughout the entire period of the war, and up till the time when I was at MINURS O, the United States did the same thing. When I was in MINURS O, the ambassador to Morocco from the United States was a man by the name of Mark Ginsburg. And according to a report that was made to me by Frank Ruddy, who was another colleague of mine at MINURS O, Mark Ginsburg told him that the United States was not neutral on the issue of the conflict, but wanted Morocco to win the referendum. And later on, Mark Ginsburg, in an address he made to the House Committee on Foreign Relations in April of 2016, he acknowledged that during the period that he was ambassador, he had conducted secret diplomacy to foster the idea of a Moroccan autonomy proposal to replace the idea of a referendum. Accordingly, while those of us in MINURS O, and I was the official in MINURS O responsible for legal affairs, when those of us in MINURS O were striving to put together a list of voters, a fair list of voters, to vote on a referendum of self-determination for the Sahrawis, the US government behind our backs was doing everything to undermine us. Now, these are just a few of the positive instances that I can quote and know about to show some of the actions of the US government. But throughout this entire period, all I can say is the United States government has not been neutral on the issue, although it has purported to be neutral on the issue, and in my view has basically caused, if not totally aggravated, the problem.
Thank you. Ambassador Ross, if you could join us, we need you to turn on your video. A question to you. You as the special as envoy for the UN Secretary General, what precisely was your mandate? And how did the politics or the politics of the United States, how did it affect, either inhibit or help what it was that you were trying to do? Ambassador Ross. Okay, we may be having a technical problem. Let me go to
Wait,
you.
can you hear me now?
Yes, can you put on your video, please?
For circumstances I don't need to get into here, I came to my laptop very late, and I didn't want to disrupt the meeting by trying to go through all the control mechanisms that govern my camera. So I'm going to have to stay off the camera, I guess.
Okay.
I'm sorry, but you've raised a big question here. I mean, my mandate, as set forth in successive Security Council resolutions, was to facilitate direct negotiations between the parties to achieve a mutually acceptable solution which will provide for the self-determination of the people of Western Sahara. That was my mandate. That was the spirit in which I conducted all the rounds of meetings that I held between the parties. Of course, the parties themselves had very different emphases when it came to what I was trying to do. The Moroccans kept insisting that I was there only to become an advocate for their position, and the Polisario was there to insist that self-determination was equally important. It was as important as the meeting and the agreement for a mutually acceptable solution. As you know, every time Morocco has cited the terms of reference, it's always dropped the reference to this self-determination of the people of Western Sahara. And the Polisario, for its part, has tended to emphasize the need for self-determination, although it has not denied the existence of the Moroccan proposal. The US, in all of the time that I was dealing with this, had a position which lasted really beyond me until the famous proclamation of President Trump, had a position that supported the UN process, supported the efforts of the personal envoy, but did not go at all beyond that. It was plain in all the briefings I held for the Security Council that almost all the members thought it was supported the UN process, and it was great that Mr. Ross was here to handle the process, but they did not involve themselves any further into the nitty-gritty of what it might take to bring an agreement and to bring self-determination. The background of all of this was, of course, a sympathy made manifest in words for the idea of autonomy under Moroccan sovereignty. I can't help but feel, and have felt for some time, that American diplomats fall prey all too easily to what I call couscous diplomacy on the part of the Moroccans. There's always a soft spot for Morocco, and neither the US nor anyone else has ever brought them to account in this process since James Baker retired, called them into account for their disregard for the terms of the UN resolutions. I mean, you know, when you look at those resolutions, they call for many things. One of them is that each party should examine the proposal of the other. Well, the Moroccans have ignored that. There's a requirement that MINURS O be allowed to talk to everybody, as is normal around the world, and the Moroccans have ignored that. And of course, the overriding condition that the Moroccans have ignored is the need to come to the negotiating table with no preconditions. They came with a major precondition. It was called the autonomy proposal. And every meeting I went to and chaired, they would come in and say, we're only here to talk about our proposal. And Polisario would say, well, we're here to talk about our proposal, but we are also willing to talk about Morocco's proposal, as is befitting this kind of negotiation. So why don't we proceed on that basis? And the Moroccans would reject that. They would say, no, we're not here on that basis. We're here to discuss our own proposal. And of course, at that point, the meeting would continue for a day or two, but it would go no further than that. So here, these are examples of Moroccan impunity that the US has not ever chosen to call them to task for. The one time that one time that the US did come to my assistance was when at a certain point, the Moroccan government decided it could no longer deal with me. And a combination of the US, the Secretary General, and even France convinced Morocco to resume its dealings with me. But by and large, the US, like so many others in the Council, has not wanted to get into the details of any kind of agreement. And I suspect that they feel that facts on the ground in Western Sahara and the passage of time will both favor the Moroccans, and basically they don't need to do much. Now, later in this seminar, I might address what I sense is the current posture, but that was the posture that I confronted when I was personal envoy.
Thank you. Stephen, ever since the Russian invasion of Ukraine, you have been very outspoken in criticizing the Biden administration for what you've identified as its hypocrisy in its approach towards Ukraine versus its approach towards Western Sahara. Can you say a little bit about that and how did you arrive at those conclusions? You're on mute.
The Biden administration, quite appropriately, has condemned Russian aggression, pointing out that no country can unilaterally change international boundaries, that no country has the right to expand its territory by force, despite what they may claim as some historical ties or to the country in question. But the United States is virtually the only country in the world that has formally recognized Morocco's illegal annexation of Western Sahara. Now, keep in mind that despite the New York Times and other media referring to the Polisario, the nationalist movement of Western Sahara, as a secessionist movement, this is not a part of a country seceding. That term is only used for a region of a country within a recognized border it's trying to pull out. Western Sahara is a separate sovereign country. It has been recognized as such by over 80 governments at one time or another. It is a full member of the African Union, prior to that, the Organization of African Unity. So what the Biden administration is doing, in effect, is recognizing the forcible takeover of one sovereign recognized African state by another. And this is a very, very dangerous precedent. It gives us little credibility to speak out against Russia's flagrant violations of international legal norms. It really feeds Putin and his apologists who say that the US opposition to Russian aggression is not based on principle, it's not based on international law, but on geopolitics. Because if we really believed in international law, if we really believed in these principles, we would oppose Morocco's invasion and occupation as well. And I think this is an important thing for us to emphasize, because there are people who say, well, there's a lot of terrible things happening in the world. Western Sahara is a small country, only 500,000 people. Why should we care when there are so many other things to be concerned about? And the concern is that really what's at stake here is the entire post-World War II international legal order. We're talking about we founded the United Nations on the principle that countries cannot just invade other countries, and that's what the Axis powers did, and that's how the United Nations responded to that. And similarly, the United States went to war in 1991 against Iraq for its forcible annexation of Kuwait. And again, that was based on this strong legal argument. I mean, some of us would disagree whether war was necessary or could have been done by other means, but there's no question that Iraq was the aggressor and the United States was on the right side by demanding Iraq's withdrawal. So this is the U.S. support for Morocco's annexation. It is a big deal, and it's more than just the suffering of the Sahrawi people. It is really a test of the United States and its credibility in this very tragic situation in Ukraine and other issues when we're dealing with aggressors elsewhere.
Thank you. So I want to ask a question that any of you can pick up, or all of you. And it goes back in some ways to what you were raising, Katlyn, in the beginning. So when the Moroccans invade or encouraged to invade Morocco, the Western Sahara by the United States, we were in the midst of the Cold War. And there were allegations that Polisario was aligned with the Soviets and with Algeria, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Leaving aside whether there was any legitimacy to those allegations, the Cold War ended in 91. So why didn't in 91, what was it that stopped the United States from taking a different posture with the end of the Cold War towards the resolution of this conflict? Whoever would like to respond.
Well, from my perspective, again, there was an underlying sympathy in various quarters of the administration for Morocco, which made any significant change in our policy very difficult. But I feel that in a very odd way, what's happening in Ukraine and the fact that Russia has come out more and more aligned itself more and more with the Polisario and with Algeria in the Security Council, kind of feeds certain perceptions that, well, if Russia is going to be on that side, we have to be on this side. And that's very dangerous, of course. But those are the facts. Trump's proclamation, the current administration, as you know, is very ambiguous about what that all means. On the one hand, there's clearly no intention anytime soon to denounce or renounce that proclamation for fear that it might somehow upset Moroccan-Israeli relations, even though those have been long going and weren't really to be affected by this. But the other factor in play here, I'm sorry, I've lost my train of thought here. Okay. The other factor in play, beyond basic sympathy and beyond the Russian role, is the positions of various players in the administration. I think there are some at the NSC, and have always been some at the NSC and some at the Defense Department, who really value our relationship with Morocco and want to keep it going. So they don't see any need to shift things. People at the State Department are sort of in the middle at a loss at what to do, since on many occasions they're not in charge of this policy. But, as they've told me repeatedly now, we are not renouncing or denouncing that policy, but we are acting as if it is a dead letter. We're not opening a consulate in Rabat. we're not doing in Laayoune or Dakhla, and we're not doing a lot of other things that the Moroccans were expecting. But still, there is this hesitation to pull back completely.
Unfortunately, if you look on State Department maps, you see Western Sahara as part of Morocco, no demarcation. When you look at United Nations maps, Rand McNally, National Geographic, Google Maps, I mean, they're all separate countries, but the United States, again, is an outlier in this regard. The State Department's Human Rights Report, which was an annual report that was released yesterday, is pretty frank about at least some of the human rights abuses by the Moroccans, but Western Sahara is listed as part of Morocco in that. I mean, all the previous annual reports in every other administration, Democratic and Republican, had Western Sahara as a separate country. Now, my sense is that if you go back to 1991, the senior Bush administration, George H.W. Bush, was actually open to the idea of an independent Western Sahara. The Polisario itself has bent over backwards to shed some of its leftist reputation from its early days, and then indeed some of their biggest supporters in Congress are conservative Republicans. But I think the concern is less about an independent Western Sahara per se, as how it might harm our friend the king. That within Morocco there is growing dissatisfaction about the corruption, about the inequality, about the failure to provide basic services, the authoritarianism, and the monarchy has been able to hold on as long as it has in many ways because it has used this as the great nationalist struggle, and has convinced many Moroccans, including Moroccan dissidents, including Moroccans on the left, that the Sahrawis welcome their liberation, and that and those who disagree are these handful of malcontents that are agents of the Algerian regime or whatever. And so if they had a free and fair referendum, which Morocco would almost certainly lose, people would be pretty upset after all those years of blood and sacrifice and the money they've poured in. And I think there's concern there'd be a backlash against the monarchy. Now, I don't think monarchy is that fragile. I think it would survive whatever foment there might be. But I do think that this may be a fear among some pro-Moroccan elements in the administration that this could be a problem for our friends in Rabat.
Yeah, and
Certainly.
have you finished, or I don't want to interrupt you. I think that we should also remember that Morocco has poured millions of dollars into lobbying various people in government in the United States, and just as importantly, think tanks, professors, people in major law firms, a lot of influential people. And they have tried to portray this conflict in their own terms, and have distorted basically what is going on and what went on. They've distorted what the Polisario are. They've tried to make them out to be a bunch of terrorists or people who are undemocratic, that have done all kinds of human rights violations. They have tried to portray themselves as being terribly honorable. In fact, one of the things that gets me, I don't know whether I should laugh or cry about it, is that the Moroccans have managed to convince most Moroccan civilians in their country that the decision of the International Court of Justice was really in Morocco's favor, all right? That they really are justified in claiming Western Sahara as their own country. They have managed to distort that decision, which cannot be distorted, it's so clear cut. And they managed to distort the historic events. The people in Morocco believe that there was no real violation of human rights when Morocco invaded. They didn't disappear hundreds of people. They didn't put people into prisons. They didn't cordon off territories and bomb the civilians who tried to escape. they didn't do any of these things. No, it was very peaceful. They went in and the people welcomed them. This is what the average Moroccan believes happened. So what Morocco has tried to do is rewrite history. And we have seen through our own experience here in the United States, how easy it is to try to rewrite history and have people believe you. So I think a combination of the money that Morocco pays to lobbyists in the United States and then misinformation that it spreads leads to policymakers in the United States not wishing to change. Why should they abandon a longtime ally that seems to be doing well, and people like it, like the monarchy, and they're being progressive in terms of democracy? All these things are not true, but it's the image that Morocco wants to portray to the Western world. And that means that there's no real justification for changing its course. So I think that has a lot to do with it.
No, and you've seen praise for Morocco from Wendy Sherman and from the secretary himself during their visits, lauding Morocco's performance on this, that, and the other, when independent reports show clearly that that kind of praise is not warranted. But it's there. I think, the Americans have taken a page out of the French songbook, because every time I went to Paris during the 8 years I was personal envoy, the French would say, the stability of Morocco depends on the survival of the monarchy, which itself depends on the retention of Western Sahara. And now they would go on that the survival of the monarchy, the key to Morocco's stability, is therefore the key to North African stability. And, in the largest sense, is the key to European stability and European security. So this was their sequence of events: Western Sahara, King, region, Europe. As I say, I think the Americans have sort of fallen into that trap. And I agree with Stephen, the King is not that weak. He's in a terrible position, but if he ever had decided to relinquish Western Sahara, he could have easily found the rationale and the language to do so. But those things are not happening. And unfortunately, the easy way out for all the various stakeholders is to do nothing. Now, here's de Mistura, who's arrived on the scene. The US says that it supports the process and very strongly supports de Mistura. There's evidence that the US did lean on Morocco to finally accept de Mistura. But, I'll be interested to see what he says in his report to the council later on this month. As far as I can tell, he hasn't figured out how to proceed. And he knows very well that to convene more meetings is meaningless because nothing ever results from them. So I'm sure he's looking for other ideas somehow and looking for support in what would become a broadening of the personal envoy's mandate, because as it was, I was the facilitator, as the council resolutions called it. I was facilitating meetings. I was convening meetings. And that was all the Moroccans wanted me to do. And they would protest anytime I said to them, well, maybe there are a few wrinkles that I can add to this. No, we don't want anything from you. You are merely a facilitator. The parties are the parties. And of course, the parties increasingly included Algeria, which, speaking to Katlyn's idea of distortions, the Moroccans have distorted every Security Council resolution. And the fact that somehow Algeria has been more frequently mentioned in the last resolutions than the previous ones proves that they were a party. Well, guess what? The Algerians certainly don't agree to that on that point. So de Mistura is casting about for some way to proceed, but it would take strong support from the international stakeholders to permit him to move beyond the two proposals, implicitly to start acting the way Jim Baker acted, negotiating something and then or designing something and then trying to get the agreement of the parties. But we're a long way from that because, again, the thing that seems to govern here is inertia and stasis, and that's tragic. I mean, I wrote the Secretary General a long letter in November of, I think, 2019 now, in the interim between Köhler and Mistura. And I said, if you expect the new envoy to do what we were doing, you're wasting your time. You need to find a broader mandate for him, or we're just going to keep spinning our wheels. And I mentioned that, the ones who are really paying for this, I thought I would touch a raw nerve, perhaps, was the ones who are paying for this are the 173,600 Western Saharan refugees in the camps. Morocco isn't suffering. Even the Polisario leadership isn't suffering. It is the refugees who are suffering. And we, Mr. Secretary General, need to do something. He never answered that letter.
So I had been thinking about asking a different question, but the way the discussion has moved, what I keep wondering about, and it relates in some ways to what you raised, Ambassador Ross, earlier, but this is to all of you, and I know, Stephen, you have to leave in a few minutes, so you might want to start. This idea that Morocco is a stable force for, let's just say, for Western interests, it seems to me that that's sort of counterintuitive, because the situation itself is unstable, and that there's great possibilities for even more instability when you look at the contentious relationship between Morocco and Algeria, when you look at the issue of non-state actors in the region, as well as the renewal of the war. So these different interests in the United States government that you were mentioning, Ambassador Ross, and others, what is it that they are not seeing in terms of this? Why is it that they seem to be oblivious to the potential for a regional conflagration? Stephen, you want to start?
I think a lot of it is a similar mindset that led the United States to support all sorts of god-awful right-wing military dictatorships during the Cold War in the name of stability, dictators who end up suppressing legitimate reform movements to be drawn into the arms of communist guerrillas in the countryside. I think of John F. Kennedy's famous line that those who make peaceful evolution impossible make violent revolution inevitable. And I think that, Algeria, because of its, natural gas reserves and other natural resources, I mean, they are over the longer term, I think, in a more powerful position than Morocco. And having this, the conflict between the two is a destabilizing. We're talking about the only closed border, absolutely closed border in the world outside of North and South Korea. I mean, the tensions are really, really strong, and the hopes of the Arab Maghreb Union that came into being, at least on paper, some years ago, where you could combine many of the resources and the trade and everything that the five Maghrebi countries has generally not gone anywhere, because of this. And so, in terms of cooperation against international terrorism, migration, other things, I mean, these have been disrupted because of this conflict. So I think it's very much in the interest to resolve this sore point, because whenever you have a situation of unresolved national self-determination, whether it be East Timor, Eritrea, or anywhere else, you're going to have this kind of conflict. And since I mentioned East Timor, I want to say something along this line, is that 25 years ago, East Timor looked like a hopeless cause. Indonesia was a key to stability in Southeast Eastern Asia. The armed struggle wasn't getting anywhere. The nonviolent resistance wasn't getting anywhere. You only had 3 countries recognizing independent East Timor. It was even dropped off the United Nations agenda. And it seemed like it seemed like the triumph of realpolitik over international law. Again, those of you who don't know, East Timor was a comparable situation in Western Sahara, a case of late decolonization. The powerful neighbor comes and invades the country on the verge of independence, but the aggressor, despite violating international legal norms, has powerful friends on the Security Council and elsewhere on its side. But what made the difference in East Timor was global civil society. That human rights groups, church groups, and others in the United States, Australia, Britain, Canada, elsewhere, kept raising the issue, kept pushing the Israel issue, kept essentially embarrassing the Morocco's allies on this issue, because it is such a clear-cut case of aggression, such a clear-cut violation of international legal norms. That it was hard to justify. And what allowed Indonesia to get away with this policy in East Timor was the backing of these major powers. What the major powers were able to get away with was because most people had never heard of the place. But once people heard about it, again, it became impossible to defend. It's not like there's a powerful group of Americans or whatever saying, "Yay, let's go Morocco." It's that people just don't know about it. So that's why I think mobilizing global civil society is so important, to make this an issue and make it one that the U.S. government will have to address, because they have to address it. They're going to have a hard time defending it. And so I think just as and then here's my one hope, because again, we can, even if you believe in a realist paradigm that the U.S. government, like other governments, are just amoral in their foreign policy or whatever, individuals are moral, and people do care about these kind of things. And so that the more people know about it, I think more people will be goaded into action, and it will be harder and harder for the U.S. government to defend. And that's why I'm very grateful to you, Bill, and the others who were able to put this forum together, and that we have a decent sized group of listeners who hopefully be inspired to do something about it. And like I said, I have to teach in about 3 minutes, so I have to run now. But thank you very much for having me.
Thanks for joining us. Take care.
I think that part of the problem is that the United States has basically tied itself too much to this Moroccan autonomy proposal. Now, anyone who has actually looked at this proposal realizes that it doesn't offer any real autonomy at all, that under its conditions, the people of Western Sahara would still be basically under the thumb of the whims of the Moroccan king, who under the Constitution can override practically anything that any organ of the government decides to do, including the courts. And this would also be the case with an autonomous region. So, but someone sold this to the US government, Mark Ginsburg, maybe others, I don't know. And I think right now, the US government probably feels that this proposal will offer the kind of stability that it wants to see in the region. It would get what it wants. It would satisfy Morocco. It hopes that it could satisfy the Polisario or the Sahrawis, because they get something out of it, at least. They're not left totally out in the cold. And it would cause the region to be relatively stable. So from the United States perspective, it's a great situation. And that's why they've adhered to it for so long. And that's why they're trying to cram it down the throats of the Sahrawi people. And of course, the Sahrawis don't want it, and they've resisted it, and they're going to continue to resist it. But I think that until the US government officials really look at this for what it is and say, well, maybe this isn't the panacea that we thought it was going to be, they're going to adhere to it and want to continue their policy of upholding it. And unless people come out and force the US government to do something else, I don't think it will. It will just continue with its current policy because it doesn't stand to lose anything by doing it.
Well, one of the strongest voices in favor of the Polisario within the US, of course, is on the Hill. Certain senators and congressmen do openly support the notion of self-determination in the case of Western Sahara. For the great American public, however, I think, there's complete indifference. No one knows where Western Sahara is. They don't, they never really care. And I think a much sharper approach on the part of the Polisario and those who support it on the notion of a stolen right of self-determination. It has to keep hitting this constantly. Who stole the right of the people of Western Sahara to determine their own future, and why? I mean, that's where, the contradiction with international law is clearest. There is an internationally recognized right of self-determination. The General Assembly still debates Western Sahara under that rubric. And I think a lot more could be made of this notion that something has been stolen from the people. Nobody gave Morocco the right to assert sovereignty. Nobody gave Spain the right to declare that the autonomy proposal is the best formula. I mean, the future of Western Sahara should be in the hands of the Western Saharans, not in the hands of Morocco or Spain or the US or France or whoever. But I think a much better effort needs to be organized to bring that side of it to the fore. On the autonomy proposal and our support for it, I spoke to one of its most vociferous supporters. I won't name him because it was a private conversation, but I asked him, you and some of your French friends and others brought the Moroccans to put this autonomy proposal on the table. What did you think was going to happen? And the answer was, well, I'm afraid we really gave Morocco the wrong impression. We acted in good faith, but we didn't realize that we were wrong in our assessment. Our assessment was that just as international support had rallied around the notion of the two-state solution on Palestine, which we had espoused finally, the same was going to happen here. That this autonomy proposal was such an obvious, reasonable compromise that everybody would rally around. Well, that never happened. And my friend, or my so-called friend who had pushed this, had to admit to me that those who pushed the autonomy proposal had misled them on what would happen. So that's the origin, in a way, of the autonomy proposal, but it also shows you that its proponents completely misjudged what the international community would have to say about it.
But I appreciate this discussion. I want to go back, though, to this issue of instability. It's something that has really amazed me, that when you look at the tension in the region, that smarter minds in the US government, leaving aside their politics, would look at this and say, Houston, we have a problem. This is something that could explode big time. And when we look at the way that various international crises can progress almost geometrically, what is it, Ambassador Ross, that they don't see? What is it that these different forces that you've described don't see?
Well, as far as Moroccan-Algerian tensions are concerned, I think there's a feeling that somehow, however tense the situation may be, it's not going to explode. So, that doesn't seem to worry people. I mean, Trump's proclamation as you know, was roundly criticized by a number of people. James Baker wrote an editorial, an op-ed piece just almost immediately after that, which I helped him write, but it was clear the Trump's proposal, Trump's proclamation was going to make the negotiations more difficult. The fact that negotiations were going to be difficult and probably wouldn't achieve success meant that there would be no progress on regional integration, whether it be economic or security or drugs or any of the other issues that require multinational North African efforts. And on top of all of that, it was going to greatly complicate our relations with Algeria for no apparent reason. So I think pieces like that and my own efforts behind the scenes certainly told the administration that it was untenable to keep pushing the autonomy proposal and then taking the next step of recognizing a sovereignty that doesn't exist. Was going to do major damage to our interests in the region, because the sine qua non of easing the tension of all kinds is a settlement of the Western Sahara conflict. And okay, now the administration recognizes, perhaps grudgingly, that something needs to be done, and I get the impression they're waiting for someone else to define what should be done, but they can't at this point ignore the fact that the absence of a settlement greatly raises tensions, greatly raises costs to American interests in the region.
We have about 5 minutes before we have to wrap up, and there was a question that was raised in the chat that's not directly related to U.S. policy, but it's important, a question I wanted to ask nevertheless. And that was that essentially, can Algeria, given issues of oil and gas and the importance of that and the pipeline into Europe, can they end up exerting sufficient influence that they could alter the status quo in favor of the sororities? That's to both of you.
Well, I can answer that from my own viewpoint.
Please.
I think that they could. I'm not sure that that this particular issue is one that would direct their entire energy policy, because I think they have other policy issues that they are also think that are important. But I think that if Algeria did say to, which it already has with Spain, if you want any more of our gas supplies, we would appreciate it if you reversed this current position you're taking on Western Sahara. I think that that Spain would think twice about adhering to the policy that favors Morocco's position. I also think that the other countries in Europe are going to be even more and more in need of other sources of gas and oil than they are now, as they keep on shutting off the pipeline to Russia. And if Algeria were to increase its production to the point where it can supply some of this oil and gas that's going to be needed, it could wield an enormous influence on what's going on in Europe towards this issue. It would probably have a lesser effect on the US position, because the US doesn't really need the oil and gas that Russia produces as much as Europe does. However, it would have a great effect on the United States political position, because the U.S. wants to have all of these allies on its side when it's dealing with Russia. So even with the United States, I think it would have an enormous influence. So I think the short answer to your question is yes. I think that they could affect quite a bit some of the policies towards this issue if they wanted to.
We need to move towards wrapping up, and I didn't know whether Ambassador Ross, you wanted to respond to that. There was a question in the chat that was directed at you that I wanted to ask you about if we have time.
Sure.
Okay, so the question
I'm
is—
sorry, just to respond very quickly to to Katlyn's statement. Fact is, Algeria has very limited capacity to increase its production. So it will do a certain amount. It's already signed an agreement with Italy to increase its exports, but there's not much more that it can do. And, you know, Spain has gone and taken this very unusual step of jumping right into the issue. I don't know what will happen there, but part of the problem with Europe is that the members of the European Union are all over the map on this, as you know. The Scandinavians are very much in support of self-determination. The French, the Spanish, not keen on it, et cetera, et cetera. So it's hard to get a continental reaction to it. But let's go to the question that was asked.
question, and we just have a minute. Question is about focusing on, you raise this issue about who stole the Sahrawi's right to self-determination. And I believe the person asking this is asking why focus on that? Why are you formulating that as something that will shift the discussion?
Because my sincere belief is that the future of this territory, this non-self-governing territory of Western Sahara, and the determination of its future should be in the hands of its population, not in the hands of Morocco, and not in the hands of Spain or the United States or anybody else. We need to find a way to consult the people of Western Sahara, which has to include both those Western Saharans still in the territory, but also that large number of Western Saharans in the refugee camps. No agreement that does not consult the population is never going to go anywhere.
Thank you very much. I want to thank both of you, Ambassador Ross, Katlyn Thomas, for engaging in this discussion. Very, very important discussion. And I want to remind the listeners what Stephen Zunes was raising before he departed about the importance of global civil society, and specifically what we can do in the United States. And I want to refer people to the website of our campaign, which is freewesternsahara.org, and take a look at that and be in contact with us if you're interested in further work. I want to thank our panelists, and I want to give a special shout out to Kyle Penniman and to Don Rojas, who, without whom this would not have been possible. And I want to thank you both very, very much. I want to thank the sponsors of this and you, the listeners and viewers, for taking the time to engage and hopefully enjoy tonight's discussion. Thank you very much and good night.